with that, thank you for coming. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Where's Mike?
Right here.
He's here. All right.
I'm here.
Thank you again for showing up.
Dennis.
Thanks, Dennis.
All right, hey everybody, thanks for coming. So yeah, I just want to thank Blue Quill for having us.
Not me.
You know, I'm going to do a talk today and talk a little bit about the history of these greenbacks. It's a real long, convoluted story, so I'm going to try not to get too caught up in the details. But we're going to talk about the history of the greenbacks and our attempts to reintroduce them here on the Front Range, the South Platte River drainage. And then toward the end of the talk, we'll talk about what we're doing here locally, mostly through Evergreen Trout Unlimited, and that's who I'm mostly representing today is Evergreen Trout Unlimited, but we work with the U.S. Forest Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Colorado Trout Unlimited, and various other government agencies. They're all a coordinated effort trying to reintroduce these greenbacks. It's a real long, convoluted story, and I'm going to talk about it, but I don't want to get too tied up in it. This picture here is looks like a one-year-old greenback. It's a great photograph taken by Kevin Rogers from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Just a really cool picture that I wanted to put up to show you. You know, just a real distinct rear spotting of these fish, and just a gorgeous subspecies of the cutthroats. Let's see. I want to see what I wanted to not leave out here. So yeah, the scientific name Oncorhynchus clarkistomius. It's a subspecies of the cutthroat. Historic range is the South Platte River Basin, but as we're going to find out as I talk here, there's a history where that is the historic range, but it wasn't always thought to be that way. There was a lot of confusion about it, and that's what we'll get into here in a little bit. As you guys know, if you fish the high mountain streams, these guys, all cutthroats, like high, clear, cold water. And that's where we're finding them. That's where we want to put them back in. Okay, so in the 1870s, 1880s, you know, European settlement came west, and these guys are all mining. They're doing logging to build their cabins, and they decimated the habitat. Okay, so they were doing the mining. The mine tailings messed up the rivers. The logging, like I said, creating sedimentation in the rivers, and the cutthroats throughout all of Colorado were just decimated. Let's see. So this is the historical range. I should say the early conception of the historical range. So this is where they thought the greenbacks and all the trout were. They thought that the green color was the greenbacks. They thought the blue color here was all Colorado River cuts, and then the Rio Grande had their own subspecies down there. But this is the conception that we've had for the last 140 years or so. But I'm going to skip over that one for a second. There was also the yellowfin, which actually became extinct. Okay, and that was just right near Twin Lakes, Colorado. That was the only place they really found those guys. So again, for years and years, decades and decades, up until the early part of this century, they conceived of just Colorado River cuts, and they thought the greenbacks were throughout the South Platte and the Arkansas drainage. And the Rio Grande cuts had their own habitat down there. I'm going to jump ahead here. So here's where things get complicated, and if you have questions, I want to tell you just to interrupt, holler out, raise your hand, because it gets a little confusing, and I don't want to get too lost in this. But what happened was throughout the whole, I would say most of the 20th century, the latter part of the 19th century, these fish were taken from Trappers Lake in hatcheries, or from Trappers Lake and hatcheries, I should say, and brought over the divide. So all the cutthroats throughout Colorado for like 100 years were getting not interbred. They were getting hybridized. So all the conceptions that we thought we had, right, going back to here, turned out to not be true, because there was all of this movement of the fish over and back and forth, mostly from western slope to east slope. And so all the cutthroats throughout the state became pretty much hybridized. And so, did anybody heard the name Jessica Metcalf? Okay, yeah, John. Jessica Metcalf did a study roughly in 2012, along with other people like Kevin Rogers and some other scientists. So what she found was, and we'll talk about, there's a little stream called, ironically, Bear Creek on the south side of Pikes Peak. They found a remnant population of, let's just say, cutthroats that looked a little weird. She did this long study. It turns out that these trout that she found, and I should go to a different slide to kind of help explain this.
Was Mike McGinnis in that one picture?
Let me go back.
I thought I saw him.
There he is.
He's right next to John.
Right there.
Standing up in the back. That's Belak on the right.
Yeah, the only guy that has a fish in his hand.
Oh,
He
right.
stole it from us.
Yeah. So let me jump ahead to Joseph Jones in 1883. This is where it gets weird, and I don't want to get too deep involved in this, but so people wanted to start hiking up to the top of Pikes Peak. Mr. Jones had a little lodge about halfway up, so he was trying to get people to stay at his little hotel lodge, serve them some dinner, and get them to catch some trout while they were there. It was a big tourist thing. So what he did, and this is where it gets a little weird, he goes up from wherever this is not a great picture here, but he goes from the south flank of Pikes Peak, goes up into which is the Arkansas drainage, goes up to the South Platte drainage for whatever reason. He goes up there because there was a pond he knew where there were fish, or nobody really knows. There was somebody had a little hatchery. He goes to the South Platte drainage, gets fish, brings them back to his little trail up to Pikes Peak, puts him in this creek called Bear Creek. Now this creek just happened to have a lower end boundary so that no fish could come up from below, and if I'm not mistaken, there must have been some boundary up top as well, or it just went up into the headwaters. And so these were a captive subspecies, just this weird little subspecies. It turns out these are the fish we're trying to put into all of our rivers and lakes. I shouldn't say all of, into a small percentage of our rivers and lakes right now. So, anyway, that's what happened there. So to go back, let's just quickly talk about the timeline. So, 1873, that's when they started doing all this crazy stocking all over the state. By 1937, they're declared extinct because just of overfishing and all the other things I was saying, mine tailings and all that stuff. In the 50s, they find, and you see the quotation marks, found in the South Platte and Arkansas Basin, because they thought they found what we're calling greenbacks now. 1973, one of the first animals in the Endangered Species Act was the greenbacks, and they were declared endangered. 5 years later, they're downgraded to threatened because they're doing so well. It's a huge success story. 1996, they're named the state fish. Everything's going great. We got greenbacks swimming around in quite a few waters. Then Jessica Metcalf comes along with her study. Okay, so...
That's the same year we won the Stanley Cup.
Oh, nice. What a coincidence.
All things good.
Maybe I should just pause a second and talk about the whole idea of genetically pure. Because when I talk to groups about this, or just to friends about this, I get a lot of grief sometimes about why are you messing with nature? Okay, so, and I hear that a lot, because we're going to talk about how you have to poison the brook trout that are in these waters if we want to reintroduce these. So I get a lot of grief, not a lot, but I get some grief from people about why you're doing this. Well, what I like to say to that is, so from a lot of my studies, 3 to 4 million years, these greenbacks are in our waters. The brooks, browns, and rainbows that we all like to catch have been there for 140 years. So, I mean, that's like a millisecond compared to the history of this fish. So, I like to say we're not messing with Mother Nature. We're just trying to correct a little stupid mistake for the last 140 years and get the fish that are, in my opinion, supposed to be in here. And it's not super important to me that they're pure, but it's a worthy endeavor, I think, to try to get the other part of it is people say, why are you trying to repopulate all these waters? Well, we're really not. What we're trying to do is we're trying to put these greenbacks into a very tiny percentage of our streams and lakes just to preserve the species so that they have a sustainable population so that someday so we don't lose the species. So they're going to be in just a few waters. We're looking at maybe 30 little stretches of river and a few lakes so that these are preserved and you can go catch a native trout to our watershed. Yeah, John?
And they're a pretty hardy fish, so that's a positive, isn't it?
They're pretty hardy. We'll talk about their temperature regime that they like. But yeah, they like cold, clean water, but they're pretty hardy, I think, compared to...
3 million years.
Yeah, they made it to 3 or 4 million years.
They hang around.
But that's the timeline there. Yeah, there's Jessica Metcalf's name. I've been working some with Kevin Rogers, who's a really bright guy. And these guys are all, like a lot of these people, like, Chris Carroll at the U.S. Forest Service, and Val Thompson at the U.S. Forest Service, and Paul Winkle. These people are either PhDs or masters of fishery biology. So I just really count on their knowledge. And I just think really, really intelligent people that are working on this project.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
How do they determine if these were the real greenbacks?
Oh, that's great. And that is coming up ahead. But
Okay.
no, let me talk about that. So Jessica Metcalf, she did these studies at Colorado University in Boulder. She took the genetics of the fish in Bear Creek, which, by the way, I call it South Bear Creek, so we don't confuse it with our Bear Creek. She took the fish that they found in this little stream, and she took the genetics of those fish and actually compared them, believe it or not, to preserved fish from the 1880s that were back at the Smithsonian and other museums back east, because the people like the settlers, whatever they were, fur traders, the people who were out west, they were taking samples and sending them back on horseback or wagon train back to the East Coast to preserve in museums. So that's one of the main key things, is she compared the DNA from these fish in this little stream to the ones from the 1880s. Pretty cool stuff, I think. But yeah, this what I call South Bear Creek on the south edge of Pikes Peak, it looks to me, and I haven't been there personally, this looks like pretty low flow, but maybe, I think it's about a quarter. I picture it as like a quarter maybe of the flow of our Bear Creek. I'm not sure. It's pretty small little stretch. So yeah, I'm gonna kind of, like I was saying, all we're trying to do, well, let's talk about this for a second. So it has threatened status right now. Interestingly enough, we don't want it to have endangered status, because endangered status, you have to jump through all the bureaucratic hoops of the federal government. So, Peg, yeah, and Ron. So we want to keep it at threatened, or perhaps even delisting it, but threatened is way better than endangered, because endangered you got to deal with incredible red tape with the government. But like I said, all we're trying to do is get maybe 20 stable populations on a few lakes and maybe 31 miles of streams, hopefully 3, 4, 5 miles right here in Bear Creek, which we're going to get to on our Bear Creek. So we're just trying to get a sustaining population. Who knows where it goes from there, but the species is kept alive, at least for now. So we'll talk about all that other stuff, the recovery group here in a minute. But so okay, so how are we getting these fish into other waters? So these guys from CPW in this particular picture here are electrofishing, as you can see. They're taking the milt and eggs, and in some cases the actual fish, but mostly the milt and eggs, and taking them to hatcheries, like the Leadville hatcheries and the Shivano hatchery up by Salida, but mostly the Leadville National Hatchery, and they're making greenbacks out of the milt and eggs. And as you can see, it's just there was only 750 fish found in this South Bear Creek, and they're only in that 3.5 mile stretch that's self-contained for these last 140 years. That's the only reason that we have these what we're calling pure greenbacks. Yeah, there's the Leadville hatchery, so they're rearing greenbacks there. Year of the young of the year, I should say, and year-olds, and they're propagating them right there, as well as at Chavano. Okay, so this June, whenever ice-off occurs, you can go up to Zimmerman Lake and catch and release these particular Bear Creek fish. There is actually fishing up there. I'm not sure the regs, they're probably pretty darn strict, but there is catch and release fishing allowed up there at Zimmerman. So that's the only still water that they're in. And this is a major source of the broodstock. So these fish are living in there and reproducing in there, if I understand it correctly. And they're getting then moved to different, they're spawning. Yeah, they're moving them to different streams. And there's been some success stories real close to where we're standing right now. So there's, is that Joe? Who's that? It's one. Oh no, that's Boyd Wright. That's Boyd Wright from the CPW putting in some greenbacks into Zimmerman. It's up on Cameron Pass, if you guys know where that is. That's just a cool picture of them. You know, you got them in these bags with water, so they're gradually introduced to the different water temperatures. But that's just a cool CPW photo, I think. Okay, so like I was saying, nearby, this is what, Herman Gulch is maybe 30 miles from here, up near Loveland Ski Area, just short of the tunnel. And some of you might have hiked that trail up there. That's one of the two places we actually have these greenbacks swimming in right now. So the first year at 16, they put Young of the Year in there, and it was not successful. And I don't have the exact timeline of this, but in 17, they put in 960 year-olds, and I believe the first stocking that year was also unsuccessful. But they've done it about 4 or 5 times, and there is now a thriving population right there on Herman Gulch. It feeds into Clear Creek right up there at Bakerville.
So what exactly is a year of young? What are you talking about?
Young of the Year is just a less than a 1-year-old, so it's just Young of the Year. It's just that they were born that year. Mm-hmm. So these guys are spring.
What size? How big are
they? I would see them like that, like probably like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's viable fish in Herman Gulch and also Dry Gulch. If I have my Dry Gulch up in that same drainage, just tributaries of Clear Creek. Okay, so here's where we're starting to get into what we're doing here in Evergreen. We're in the phase now, we're about, say, 3 years behind Herman Gulch. Something like that. You know, they did all the temperature studies. They did their whirling disease study. They made sure the brook trout were eradicated. We're a little bit behind that, several years behind that. What we're doing right now is we have temperature loggers in 10 different tributaries of Bear Creek up at the east flank of Mount Evans. And we're trying to find out if the temperature regime up there is conducive to putting in cutthroats. I'll go over a graph here shortly that shows some pretty promising information. We want to see if the temperature regime is right. We got to check for suitable habitat. And we also got to make sure we can find either a natural barrier on the downstream end so we don't have invading brook trout, and or build one. And believe it or not, there's funds available up to the tune of $250,000. I'm not saying it's going to happen in our drainage, but at Long Draw Reservoir up on the Pooter, they have already invested, I think, $250,000 in man-made barriers because they couldn't find a natural one. So hopefully we find a natural one. I'm going to be doing some hiking with Val Thompson and Paul Winkle come May or June on our whole drainage, and I'm looking for volunteers. Here's one of my main guys right there, Jimmy Murphy. He does a lot of my long hikes for me, and Bill, to go up. And what you'd be doing next, Bill, if you want to do some hiking, and Jimmy and whoever else, we're now looking for these barriers, okay? So we have some good temperature information, but now we want to see if we can find lower end barriers so we don't get invasion. If you get, I'm sorry, yeah, and I should have mentioned, I shouldn't have just limited it to brook trout. Right. So you got browns and rainbows that theoretically could come up. But yeah, it would be any other species other than the natives that would be rotenoned out. I'll talk about rotenon here in a second. Again, not the greatest map, but if you guys know the areas, that's what I call the 6 mile fork, right? You're coming up Upper Bear from Evergreen. This is the road up to Outdoor Lab in Mount Evans. This is the road Yankee Creek. Okay? So, give you without going through it in tremendous detail, I will tell you we have a temperature logger here on Indian Creek. Anybody know where Indian Creek Ranch is? Jeff DeDeese has a huge spread up there. I know you do, John. You probably did plenty of horseback riding up there as a kid. Fantastic place. I got a few pictures of it that I've been lucky enough to hike on in the last couple of years. But anyway, Indian Creek Ranch, we have one on Indian Creek itself. We have one on Bear Creek below its confluence. We have one on Lost Creek, Truesdale Creek, right here. We've got one on Bear Tracks Creek, wherever the heck that is, somewhere here where it meets Bear Creek. Bill's been up there, right? You've been up there and got a logger in there, or check the gauge on it.
Grass Creek.
Grass Creek. Jimmy, you've been there. Where's that? Down Grass Creek. I don't know if it made the map.
Yeah, it's not on the map.
It's not on the map, but Grass Creek. For your reference point, this is Camp Rock is right in here, the end of the road. This is where the Will Spence's house is, the CPW guy. If you know where you're getting up there near Groundhog Flats, he's got a place up there. He's been super cooperative. Lets us go up in there and hike around. And it's closed until June 15th, but we have permission through CPW. A guy named Will Spence, that is the guy up there. He lets us in, and so we can check our temperature loggers any time of the year. But yeah, so I mean, and the people I talk to, the scientists at U.S. Forest Service and CPW, really love this drainage as far as its possibilities. It just has a lot of positive things. It has a good elevation. The gradient is very promising. The negative parts are it's a little inaccessible. Like Herman Gulch, well, you got to take a hike, but you go up I-70 and you go hike up in there. Some of these are a little hard to get to, and talking to Val Thompson at U.S. Forest Service last week, she seems to think that one of the best possibilities is the Bear Creek and the Bear Tracks Creek confluence up here, mainly because it's only on U.S. Forest Service property, and we don't have to deal with homeowner permission and the nightmare of that. And we have total access to that particular stretch. So, you know, I try.
Where
Go
is
ahead, John.
Vance Creek there?
Vance Creek's right up here.
It's right there. So is that one of them?
Anybody
Next
see
one
it?
up. Next one up.
Yeah, Vance Creek's right there.
Yeah.
We have one. I should have said we have one on Bear Creek right below, if I can find it, below the confluence of Bear Creek.
Right there. You
Okay.
Right there. I got a
So we-
logger right in there. I got one way up in the headwaters of which creek? Of Yankee Creek. That says Indian Creek. Yankee Creek's over here. I got one way up here on private property. The guy has, I think I talked to you about this, Chris. This guy, Sean Ellis. Sean didn't make it here today, but he has a big parcel of land up there, and he's building he's building a reservoir up there. He bought 2 acre-feet of water. He's building a reservoir, and he wants to put these greenbacks in up there. I don't know where that's going, but guy's got a lot of money, and he loves to fish, and
I like his
he's
last
trying to
name.
put these guys into his impoundment up there. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, we got 10 of these in there, and we're going to get to the readings here in a second. Am I going real long here or short? Oh, Mark didn't make it here either, huh? There's my buddy Mark Masters. This is Yankee Creek, right at Brookvale. John knows where Brookvale is. Brookvale is what they call, you know, it's at that 6 mile mark. If you went left on Yankee Creek, that's where we are there. That's Yankee Creek, just before it feeds into Bear Creek. So right where he's pointing is where we have a temperature logger. And it's not unusual. I know that stream looks small, but that might be the kind of waters, in some cases, where we put these guys in. And the reason we do that, photographs like this, is so when we go back to look for the temperature loggers, even though you have GPS coordinates, it's nice to go, oh, he's right next to that really blue spruce tree. You know, that's where it is. And so we try to get exact locations.
Looks different when it's covered with ice.
Yeah. Jimmy had to go up to one of those places. It was late October, maybe, last year.
Yeah.
And it was borderline. We had some 0-degree nights. And luckily, he brought an axe with him because he had to break through the ice to check the temperatures. But being a trooper, he got it.
Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
how old do the fish get in these little creeks? Just a couple of years, and it's enough for them to breed and stuff. Keep
That I don't know. That I'd have to leave up to
They don't get
these.
very big, right? I wouldn't think.
They're not going to grow. No, there's no wintering there. Yeah.
But your point about cold, the temperature of the water, actually they're concerned with it being too cold in many instances.
That's true. We're going to talk about that on a graph I got coming up there. But yeah, obviously there's no wintering holes on something like this of any note. So,
But Bear Tracks and Bear Creek have more flow than that.
oh yeah, and some of these waters, in a couple of next slides, you'll see some good sized water. But Chris from Forest Service seems to think that these kind of tributaries are feasible for this project. I'm not sure. I leave a lot of that up to those guys. This is on Indian Creek Ranch. Just a cool picture. I stumbled on this. John, you ever seen this? This is up.
Some by the
It's
ranger.
this is near the confluence of Bear Creek and Indian Creek on Dedese's land up there. Like, obviously, they used to have cookouts and burn some fires, but it's very near this particular spot. So that's Indian Creek flowing into Bear Creek on Indian Creek Ranch. We have a logger right up in here, maybe 200 yards up, and then I have one down here below the confluence, and that's really good water. Just a cool picture. There's a lot of these little pedestrian bridges that haven't been touched in many years, and you know, I get to hike up here, and Jeff Dedese allows us to get up there and do all this work up there, and I take advantage of it by doing some hiking up there, and just a beautiful area. You'd be surprised. I thought, you know, we're all fishermen, I think, mostly in this room. Be surprised. I thought we'd go up there. They asked me to do fishing. Somebody's got to do it, right? They actually almost demand that I bring a fly rod with me because we want to see what's in there. If there are brook trout in there. And I went up there and then fished it, I think 3 times in this stretch. And you'd be surprised. I was a little surprised. The brooks are a little stunted. Yeah, there's a brook. You know, that's actually a big one. They're pretty stunted. They're pretty stunted. Mark's got his finger in his mouth, so that one we won't have to kill off. But that's actually a big one. And there were smaller and not quite as many as I would have thought, because it doesn't get fished a lot. Now you can insert your own joke about how bad a fisherman I am here, but I just was surprised. I was thinking every cast, and it was more like every 5th or 10th cast. And they were averaging 4 or 5 inches as opposed to 7 or 8.
Why did you use?
You could throw anything in there. Number 10 Royal Wolf's pretty good, you know. But backing up here, so there's Jeff Dedese's spread. That's that's his house there, and then he's got this shop here. He runs cattle up there. It's gorgeous. It is just Indian Creek Ranch, and there's a bunch of summer homes up there. I didn't know this existed. You've been up there. You did a concert up there. Yeah, a show. Yeah.
Music.
It's just a cool spread. Indian Creek Ranch. So what I'm doing here, looks like I'm just sitting on my butt, but I actually have a GPS device, so I'm putting in the coordinates here. This is more for the photograph. We're going to take this red flag off of here, but you can see I have a cable going in. I think the temp logger is probably sitting right here. What's called the thalweg of the stream, the part of the stream where if you had 1 CFS or a half a CFS, where would that water be? That's just the thalweg, the low central channel, if you will, of the creek. And that's where we try to put these loggers in, so they log temperatures 365. So yeah, we got a cable going to it. I'm going to put the coordinates into my Garmin here, and I'm going to make a note on paper of cable going to piece of rebar, which is what that is. We'll either put it to rebar or to a stable tree root, and make notes of that so we can go back and find the loggers. Again, pointing at, I went back here with Dave Schumacher to try to get, and we could not find this temp logger. So I had this picture on my phone, and I found that rock. That's the only, that's the only way I found that temp logger. Really came in handy to have these pictures on your phone when you go up there. There's that brookie.
That dead brookie.
A soon to be gone brookie, hopefully. Okay, so this is the waterfalls I'm talking about. I took this picture to show Chris Carroll, and he said, yeah, that's pretty, but that ain't gonna work.
Barrier, you mean?
As a barrier. It's not gonna work as a barrier. Because especially at high flows, a trout's gonna work his way up there. But I was taking pictures to try to say, hey, look, I found one. And he's like, no, that ain't cutting it. It needs to be a serious barrier. I think I might have one found between Indian Creek Ranch and Groundhog Flats. You know the area I'm talking about with that. There's a tremendous rock wall if you've ever hiked up there. I couldn't get by it by even hiking around it. That's the kind of thing they're looking for, like a real, true barrier that a brook or whatever can't get up. But again, just for the picture, it's pretty water up there. Okay, so Kelso's not here. Kelso caught this guy, I think, either Kelso or Buck that used to work here. Caught this up in these waters. He, being a fly fisherman, he won't tell me exactly where, but blue quill guys have access to a lot of cool waters, and he kind of gave me that sly grin and said, yeah, it's up there somewhere in that general area. But it does prove to me that there are cutthroats up there. So again, we got a quandary here, right? I mean, I'm with you on some of this. We got a beautiful cutthroat here. This guy's doomed if we do this project. So I'm not saying I'm 1,000% behind this because of things like this. This is a hybridized cutthroat trout. Yeah, Mike?
Unless you electroshock and take them out, like you were talking about.
Unless you electroshock it. Now, that was a possibility. And I'm going to get to that here shortly. We mostly are going to poison these waters, in theory, to get our pure greenbacks in. But, like on Herman Gulch, I understand they did a lot of the alien fish removal via electrofishing.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
We caught them one day, and then we electroshocked the rest a month later.
Okay, so you helped out on the volunteer day.
Correct.
On Herman?
Yes.
Yeah. So
this is a hybrid of what? Do we know?
okay, it's all those fish that came from Trappers Lake in 1880. I don't know. Nobody knows.
And that hybrid would actually be spawning in this section?
They're wild.
Yeah, they can theoretically successfully spawn. Yeah, absolutely. Wild hybridized cutthroat. So yeah, possibly we could electroshock this guy or all of these fish and hike them back out in water-filled bags and put them somewhere below a barrier. That would be ideal. But yeah, that's a darn nice fish there.
That's what they have in Summit as well.
What's that?
That's what they have in Summit Lake as well.
Summit, right?
Yeah.
Right. And we could talk about that a little bit. So if we end up poisoning, I hate using that word, if we end up rotenoniing these waters, killing, what happens to the fish? And I was asking Chris this the other day, what happens to those great fish in Bear Tracks Lakes? Summit Lake. Because in theory, you would have to go from the lower boundary to the headwaters. Summit Lake is the source of Bear Creek. I can't imagine, like Mike and I were talking about this morning, I can't imagine that we're going to kill off the cutthroat trout in Summit Lake. So possibly there would be an upper boundary. And again, I'm getting beyond my knowledge of this, but I can't imagine we're going to kill off the trout in Summit Lake of all places. So I'll have more information next year about that probably, because we really all we're doing right now is we're just ETU and CTU and all the other helpers they have. We're just like citizen volunteers. You know, the U.S. Forest Service and CPW, they know what they're doing. We're just guys going up there putting thermometers in streams. And in the course of that, I've learned a lot about this, but I'll try to figure out what goes on with the upper headwaters in the near future. Okay, so I don't want to get too deep into this because I don't want to bore you to tears, but here are the 10, okay? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 temperature loggers we have in those creeks I just pointed out. Green numbers are good. Those are promising. I'll explain it briefly here. Green numbers are good. Red numbers not so good. Yellow is borderline. So most of these waters we have 2 years of studies, 18 and 19. Bear Trap Creek and Bear Creek headwaters, the ones way up I was talking about, we were not able to get up there because if you recall, winter came in early. Hopefully it's finally leaving a little bit, but it came in early in October, and it got cold, and we weren't able to get our readings this year. That's not so bad because those things are still in the streams. They're still reading temperatures once an hour. Once every hour we get a temperature reading. So, but we only have 1 year of data on a couple of these places. Okay, so the red numbers scared me when I looked at this, but just last week I talked to my Forest Service people, Val and Chris, and they said, and again, I don't want to get too deep into this, degree days and stuff. Does anybody know what a degree day is? Oh, you didn't
What's the
do...
degree?
Chris,
Oh,
Chris
but
does.
not counting Chris. Not counting Chris from Evergreen Metro District. You guys didn't pay attention in junior high science, huh?
No.
So, if a particular river, say, has a temperature of 10 degrees Celsius for 30 days, that's 300 degree days. So let's put it in more better, easier terms. If June, July, and August you average 10 degrees Celsius, that's 90 days. So you have 900 degree days, and that's a good number. That's sort of the bottom end of where we want to be for the greenbacks. The other thing is the M30s, which I'm trying to remember exactly. Oh, go ahead.
I'm not sure what an M30 is myself.
M30.
Maximum 30-day average temperature.
There you go.
Yeah. And so those numbers
Celsius.
you can see are green because, oh, I know what happened. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's your maximum 30-day temperature reading. So say the month of July, right, our hottest month, we had pretty decent readings. But the other thing is, we didn't get these thermometers, or I should say loggers, into the river very early. I got these in there like in July. So therefore it couldn't build up enough degree days. But the M30 was good because it had a nice 30-day period. And what they're looking, like you alluded to earlier, Mike, is they're not looking, you would think they're looking for cold, cold, cold. They're not. They're looking for a nice, reasonably warm temperature, relatively warm temperature that these cutthroats can bulk up in. Okay, so you want, like in the summertime, you want those temperatures up around 9 or 10 Celsius, which, if my chart, if I remember, is 50-ish degrees. You want it right in that 9 to 10 range, 50 Fahrenheit range, so they can bulk up and they can get ready to reproduce. So they're looking for a little bit more temperatures on that high end rather than the super low end. But anyway, some of these waters, as you can see, are pretty promising. There's Indian Creek, Yankee Creek, and these, even though we see in some red here, our M30s are pretty good. So a lot of these waters in our drainage are pretty promising right now.
Truesdale is a little surprising.
What's that, Truesdale?
Truesdale is a little
Yeah.
surprising.
I'm surprised at those red numbers there. Yeah, because they're not super high.
No, and that comes out of Roosevelt. It's pretty
Yeah.
shaded up in that area.
Yeah, I was a little surprised, but so we only have either 1, mostly 2 years of data. We're looking to get, I think we probably want 3, maybe even 4 years of temperature data before we really can make conclusions about all these studies. Any questions on this chart? Okay, so yeah, that talks about, there's the M30. So we want it, you can see some of those were 9 and above, and we didn't have a lot of red on our M30s. So it's pretty promising. Degree days, again, fairly promising in our drainage.
Go back one, Mike. Was Truesdale, what was it?
Pretty
Nine
low.
and
Now,
8.4.
I don't recall when I put those in. Again, this number depends on, did I get it in there in July of 18 or did I get it in there in June? That would predict what that number is. And oh, there it is. See, we didn't get it in there till late. Okay. And then this year we got it in there earlier, and the number went up. But now they're sitting in there, so there's none of the installation and the short degree day data. I was going to show you guys this in person. So this is actually one of the types. This little guy, there are 2 different types of temp loggers. This little guy is actually what sits in the bottom. That's that one in the bottom left. And the other one, the bigger one, whoops, is a Pro V. Got too many devices in my hand here. This guy is a Pro V. That's what we have. I think it's 7 of the places, and these guys are in 3 of them. And those are the 2 different types of loggers. We take this data and we put it into a computer. Steve Murray from Trout Unlimited dissects the data and sends it to the Forest Service. So, pretty simple process.
Well, so how long do they last once you put it in, battery life?
About 3 or 4 years. So probably for the life of this study. Yeah, they last super long. We've had some mistakes. We went way up into the hills, and yeah, it flashes green to tell you your data is good. And
Mike, I've had people bring those in to me at the bank and hand it to me and say, "Look what I found in the river."
yeah,
Where did you find it?
have you seriously?
Yeah.
I know
Oh yeah,
Chris.
they yanked them out of the creek. Oh yeah.
Evergreen Metro's had vandalism over there by Keys on the Green on theirs. Yeah, so that's why we don't put those red flags. I should have said that earlier. We don't put the red flags. You don't want to draw attention to it.
Private water is probably best.
Private water, we're not so worried. Keys on the Green by the bridge there, and there's a red flag and a cable. People are going to mess with it, and they did on Chris's. But just don't want people.
They might serve it as their daily special at the restaurant out there.
Let's see.
Chris,
Cable for it.
Chris, what year was it that ETU we bought the loggers to do the joint study?
Right.
And in 2013, September 2013, every one of them were washed away.
We lost a few of them. Some of them got buried.
Everything washed away.
Yeah.
That's one thing about
6 or 8.
when you put these in the creek, you really have to go back and look at them because rocks move. Streams change. Just a nice runoff can change that. That way, it can move it over a foot.
Right.
And the next thing you know, your logger's high and dry half of the next season. So
Right.
I'm wondering if we didn't see that somewhere on Truesdale, if it might have moved a little bit, or you had a small little change
Right.
in channelization and it came back
Right.
again.
That's
There
why
you go.
checking, reading the data every year and also checking its location is something we will be doing a lot of.
Don't they make a little
I was
GPS?
going to say.
They do make GPS tracker things.
Oh,
You could attach to it, and then there's an app on your phone that you can actually.
See if it moves at
I had
all.
those on my grandkids. It worked great.
So a question,
Yeah.
in terms of, is there any entomologies being done in terms of just sustainable ones? I didn't see it on the list of things, you know, to reintroduce, you check these kind of things off.
Yeah, and again, Chris, who's with Evergreen Metro, would know a little more about that. He does the invertebrate studies, right? Macro.
Yeah, we do invertebrate studies. We also do some fish studies with Parks and Wildlife. We've done Vance Creek, main stem. I think we did the creek up there just below bear tracks as well. There are some decent bug populations up there. I think Paul Winkle, you could probably get the record from him on what kind of fish we found up there as well.
Right. Oh yeah.
I remember seeing some big browns up there. I'm like, how the heck did these guys get up here?
Up where?
Up near bear tracks.
You got the GPS coordinate.
Yeah. No.
Has Winkle released the fish counts?
I believe we have that information.
Oh, cool.
I think the highest we went up this year was the Williams property up there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure we went up in the wilderness area though, up on Vance Creek. I don't think we did one of those. Those are such small creeks that you can't do your traditional 5 guys in a row. You have somebody with a backpack on basically, and you're doing these small sections like we did on we did one on Little Cub Creek about 7 years ago, and I'm not going to tell you what we found there.
There's also some beaver dams up there. There's some pretty good backwater from some of them.
So yeah, and I'm just about at the end here of slides, but we can have a little back and forth if you want. Yeah, these names here, if you recognize some of these, they're especially that are on Evans Ranch. I tried to get permission up there to put some temp loggers up there. I didn't get a very warm reception. There's a lot of millionaires live up there that don't want you to slip and fall and empty their bank account, I guess, is what I kind of picked up on. So there's a lot of private property up there that would be ideal, but we haven't been able to get permissions up there. We do work with Bear Creek Watershed Association, like Chris and I were just talking about with Evergreen Metro. You know, it's a total cooperative effort. So like I was saying, the next thing is doing a barrier survey, check, you know, by fishing. Literally, they want us to just fish to see what's in there. Fishing, and hopefully they're fishless, and we don't have to kill anything off. If that was the case in some of these waters,
But then you got to worry if they're bare.
why is it fishless? Right, why is it fishless? Right, that's true. Good point. So there's other projects. I don't want to get way into this. Long Draw is a mega dollar project up on the Pooter drainage. George Creek is also up there. Those are the two off of Clear Creek that we talked about. There's also Rock Creek down in the upper South Platte near feeds into Tarryall.
I think so, yeah. It's
Yeah.
Near Jefferson, Colorado.
Yeah. Yeah, that one there was invasion of brook trout from below. They thought they had a good barrier in there, and it got invaded by brook trout. So, you know, there's always like a couple of steps back a lot of times in this. It's never just straightforward. So, how can you get involved? I should do a pitch for Evergreen Trout Unlimited. You can join our group. We do a lot of cool things. I won't do a huge commercial here, but you know, by joining our chapter, we're real involved. This is one of our main projects. We have other projects that are really cool, working with kids and stuff like that. But you can volunteer up on Herman Gulch. They always need volunteers up there to carry in more fish if they need them, or whatever's needed up there. You can volunteer for that. That's the West Denver chapter, but you know, you should probably join our chapter instead.
Yeah, you can get to the volunteer sign-up list through the CTU website, ctu.org. Right?
Yeah. So there's all kinds of you know, stocking, spawn. You can even help with the spawning of the fish. Have you done some of that?
I've never done that part. I've done everything else.
Yeah, yeah. You carry them up in the bags. I mean, I didn't do it because I kind of got bad knees, and 8 or 9 miles with 20 pounds on me didn't sound too promising. But if you're up for a good hike up Herman Gulch or any of these other places, it's a worthwhile thing to volunteer for. I want to make sure I didn't leave anything out. I got a few notes here. So, yeah. So Paul Winkle, whose name has come up a few times, he's I don't know his title, fisheries biologist for our for our region.
Yep.
So I've been working with U.S. Forest Service and CPW, which Paul is in. Paul is ultimately the guy who's going to bless one of these operations. Actually, once the U.S. Forest Service and our Trout Unlimited group and whoever, we're gathering data. Paul Winkle is going to, I'm going to do some hiking with him this spring, and we're going to show him the water. We're going to show him the data. He's the guy who's going to actually give us the blessing to keep going forward. And he's a guy we've worked with for a lot of years. He's a good guy. He doesn't return emails too quickly. But he's a busy guy. He's got a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, let me talk about, just briefly to end the thing, is the whole idea of doing this, like I talked about a little earlier. Do you want to kill all these other fish and put them in there? There's another thing related to that that's troubling me a little bit. And I thought about not bringing this up because I wanted to all be happy. But those fish in Bear Creek, South Bear Creek, they've been living there that we know of for 140 years in this little confined space of 3.5 miles. Okay, so they're inbreeding. Okay, normally a fish gets to see a whole watershed, or his relatives, his descendants get to swim through a whole watershed. These guys have been living in this little 3.5 mile space, and the genetic markings are very inbred. So they're having problems with these fish. This is where the mad scientist part comes in and starts bothering me a little bit. So what they're talking about doing, and this is crazy to me, they're talking about getting some other genetics from other cutthroats involved in them. So I guess my point is, there's nothing perfect in the world, and the fact that these are quote-unquote genetically pure is not that big a deal. We all like to just catch some nice, cool-looking cutthroats, but that part kind of bothered me a little bit, in that because they've been confined, they're just a little bit, their genetics are just a little off, and they're having trouble with reproducing and with their health. So I hate to end it on a bummer note, but
Well, I have kind of a question along that point that maybe
Yeah.
furthers it. My question would be, how long, like the Zimmerman Lake population and the Herman Gulch population, for instance, Rock Creek when it gets going, these will develop themselves, and I don't know, I'm not enough of a biologist to know how long it will take for them to do their own evolution, for lack of a better term.
right.
But then we'll be able to crossbreed a little bit, I think, and get. But my question is timeline on that. Is that 3 or 4 generations of fish?
Yeah.
Or is it this one?
And that's getting beyond my pay grade, and that's why these PhDs, like some of these people like Kevin Rogers, know that's definitely beyond my pay grade to tell you what generation, how many generations that would take.
Mike, there's a bunch of these posters, everybody, over here, so feel free to take one. They're kind of cool, and they explain some things and give you some information.
Any other questions, anybody?
Yeah, Mike, if they're gonna play with the genetics, why don't we breed in to the fish that they'll bite any fly that comes along? I mean, instead of owning 5,000 flies, we go fishing with one fly.
I'll bring that up at the next meeting.
If we're gonna play God, let's just go all over.
Jimmy, what up?
I'd always heard that, I think it's Mosca Creek above the sand dunes.
Yeah.
Had provided, the sand dunes had provided a natural barrier, that there were cutthroat up in there. Have you heard anything about that?
I did read about that, but I can't speak to it. Yeah, I did hear something about that. I'll look into that, but I do not know anything beyond that on that. Yeah.
The whole barrier thing on Bear Creek,
Yeah.
I guess I'm not familiar with that. I mean, I hiked up there a couple of years ago, and I actually saw 2 guys up there fishing. I wasn't up there fishing. I was just hiking, and they were catching brown or brookies. They had 5-gallon pails full.
Really?
Yeah.
We're
fast
like
as they could.
groundhog.
Well, if you go all the way to the parking lot, the part of this parking lot,
Yeah,
and then
camp
hike
route.
up in there.
And so what were they doing? They were gathering fish?
They were catching brookies. I
taking them home.
lost them. They had 5-gallon pails. Jeez.
Do you recognize anybody in this room?
I mean, that kind of stuff, they call it bucket biology. I mean, that's why Yellowstone Lake is all messed up now. I mean, I don't know how you stop that.
That's right. But I guess a lower barrier, I can see.
Oh yeah.
You know, but then as far as Summit Lake goes, I mean, unless they took the fish out of Summit Lake, wouldn't there always be a chance that you would, that fish would come down through and the species would then be interbred anyways?
Well, we were talking about that.
Yeah.
There's
I mean,
no way
I would
we're
think if they were going to do the
Summit Lake.
project on Bear Creek, they would have to take the fish out of Summit Lake and make that a greenback stream from wherever the lower barrier is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think they wrote on Summit Lake.
No, I think you're probably first looking at doing the tributaries first. The main stem of Bear Creek, I don't know that you're ever going to get
Yeah.
barriers on. It's just too much flow. A lot of it's on
Private property.
private land too. Some of it's on public. But any stocking efforts on the main stem are going to be a problem. I think if you're sticking to the tributaries, you have a better chance.
You need a barrier like the upper middle of Clear Creek, right? An old bridge or an old something that
Any
feet
other
high.
questions?
No, any of that stuff.
Even
So
even
that
like
separates the fish.
even a spillway or a waterfall,
Right.
you're going to get something
Mike,
around that.
whatever happened to, remember the gentleman that was with Trout Unlimited that did the video, back to give you a time frame, that showed where they got the greenback cuts that were on the other side and how they were brought over here. And I remember we went to a Trout Unlimited function that we'd won awards in and everything of Evergreen Trout Unlimited, but for CPU.
Yeah.
And they had a big fight about it, and they started fisticuffing and
You're
everything.
talking about our friend Hugh Gardner?
That's what I'm talking about. That's it. I couldn't
Don't
remember
mention Hugh Gardner's name. Chris Showers in the room.
Chris just had a heart attack.
What about it?
Well, he
Brilliant
did a
historian.
video.
Oh yeah, that's what. But see, when Hugh was doing all this, you're talking 1990s, turn of the century.
Yeah.
He was dealing with the hybrid. He thought he was dealing with greenbacks.
That's
Like I ran into Dick Wheeler yesterday, and I was telling him try to come by here today, and he was telling me he's caught greenbacks, and I had to go, no, you didn't. You thought you thought you did. You caught a hybridized cutthroat.
Exactly.
That's what kind of this whole talk is about. Like, and again, I have some misgivings about genetically pure. It's not like I'm 1,000% behind. They got to be genetically pure. I got some misgivings about that, is what I'm saying. So I'm just throwing that out there that it's not a perfect world, I guess. You know.
Hey, it was green.
It was green. It had a back. It was green on its back. Yeah. There you go. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Unless there's more questions. Yeah.
I was about a month ago hiking on some high cliffs above sort of west-northwest of Singing River Ranch.
Yeah.
And I found a soft pack. It's probably been out there for several years because it's deteriorated, but hundreds of flies in it, extra reels, extra stuff. So if anybody, if you can tell me what the brand name of the soft pack, I'll know it's here.
Let's see.
So it's tough.
Orvis.
Is it multiple choice?
Attached to it?
No, but yeah, if you know somebody or that was yours, talk to me.
Was there a royal wolf in there?
Hey, everybody, get Mike Goldblatt
They
a
already
big
gave me a
hand
hand.
for doing a super job.